Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's live. My name is Cynthia, an instructor with Iris Reading based out of Chicago. Very happy to see you today here. Thank you for supporting our live again this morning. We are broadcasting live from Chicago, so if you'd like to share where you're joining us from, we would love to see. A little bit about Iris Reading before we get started. So we are talking about comprehension today, improving our comprehension at that. Iris Reading is most known for our speed reading workshops, and we have taught these workshops in over 100 cities around the world. So I'm curious, have we taught a workshop where you're from? Let us know in the chat. Also, let us know if this is your first time hearing about us or working with us, if you've maybe attended one of the free workshops that we've offered through Eventbrite. We'd like to see who we have. With that, we will also be using what we call a Dropbox link with a few documents for today's presentation. Miami, oh, hello, Miami. Very happy to see that. I wish we had better weather here in Chicago. It is so cold and just miserable. But anyway, we have a few documents that we'll be using for today's presentation, and you can find them at irisreading.com/comp, C-O-M-P. Hello, Columbus, welcome. Hello, New York. We were just in New York. Our founder and CEO, oh, and I forgot to mention, our founder and CEO, Paul Novak, is actually working the chat. He is here with us just behind the scenes. My coffee hasn't kicked in, I'm sorry. Hello, Marcia from Iowa City, welcome. Yeah, we're very happy to see New York. Thank you, Marcia from Iowa City. Welcome, Marcia. Thank you so much for joining us today. As we mentioned, we do have all of our documents that will be used for today's class at this link, irisreading.com/comp. All right, so I'll give you all a second to pop that up in a separate tab. I'll also share these documents on my screen, but just in case you can't really see it clearly on your end, you can always pop them up in a separate tab. All right, let's keep going here. So we are talking about comprehension strategies today. What happens sometimes for us as students, we're reading through things and we think we get it, we think we know it, and then we take the test and it turns out we don't. All right, and so that's kind of scary, right? I'm also a student. I'll share I'm going after a PhD in educational psychology. So it feels like I've been in the classroom for years. And I'm right there with you if you're having a hard time with comprehension. And we hope that today's workshop helps you out a little bit more. I'll also share, definitely check out what we have, our our speed reading workshop. We also teach memory techniques, effective note-taking, improving productivity and focus. So if you're struggling with any of those areas, for a limited time, we are offering those for free on Eventbrite. So you can either send me an email, send me a message directly here, and I can send you the link so we can get you to one of those classes. Hello, Lisa from Washington, D.C. Welcome. Very happy to see you today. How's the weather over there? I'm imagining it's kind of cold too. So again, we did share that link. And really quickly, we are on social media. So if you do enjoy today's workshop, please check us out on TikTok. We do have a Facebook. So we have an official Facebook page, and we also have a book club on Facebook of a Facebook group called Book Lovers Assemble. So if you'd like to see what we're reading this week, this week we were reading Lolita in Tehran, which is a great read. We'll do a little summary video today and upload that on our Facebook group. But again, if you are maybe reading something and you'd like to share what you're reading, feel free to hop on there. Rosa from Covington, Kentucky, welcome. Very nice to see you. We are again on Instagram, and obviously as you are watching today, we're also on Facebook. So again, if you enjoy, please a like, a follow, a subscription, we would appreciate that. Now, we have what is called the IRIS method here. obviously at Iris Reading, okay? You might have heard of something called the study cycle, okay? But our version of that is the Iris method. And we talk about this throughout, as I shared earlier, all of our, like our speed reading, our note taking, our memory, all right? We start off our series with inspecting and our speed reading workshop. So essentially, we don't want you to just start reading something from beginning to end, right? There's a lot of things that could go wrong there. So an inspection helps with attention, if we're struggling with attention, with comprehension as well, which will be discussed today, right? So really quickly, I won't really break down all of these four important principles in our IRIS method because, again, I don't want to spoil it if you want to attend these workshops in the future. But we talk about inspecting and reading in our speed reading workshop. And it's really simple. We're basically saying inspect before you read, and then decide if you do have to read this or not. As I mentioned, I'm also a student, and over the weekend, I have a professor that just loves to send things over email, read this, read that, this is important, right? And I'm also working a full-time job. I have a home to maintain, right? There's a lot of things going on in my life as well. So I can't just sit down over the weekend and read 20 hours of material. So inspecting helps me prioritize what needs to be read now versus what can be read for later, pushed off for later. So that is inspect and read. Third step, as we're reading, we obviously encourage our participants to ask questions, which is really, really important. Unfortunately, we have seen that some students kind of just skip over the asking questions part and they just want to nosedive right into memorizing something. But again, if we're not asking the questions, what does this have to do with anything? What does this have to do with my class? Why did my teacher make me read this? They might seem like some pretty sarcastic questions, but the truth is that if you can't answer them, we really don't want you to move on to the final step, which is trying to memorize something, right? And that is our fourth step in this IRIS method. So making sure we're asking questions. We talk about this in our note-taking workshop, and then progressing over to memorization or storing. I'll share that like 12, 13 years ago, I graduated from nursing school, and because I was so overwhelmed and I think over caffeinated, I was trying to memorize things that I didn't really understand. So if you're a student and you probably can relate to this, just being, again, flustered and overwhelmed with the amount of material that you have to read, sometimes we'll do that as students, right? We don't really think about the material, how it ties into what we're learning. But again, if we don't do that, it's almost like trying to memorize something that's really big, but also really empty. Okay, so we are going to talk about the 6 different areas of comprehension, because most of us probably think you either get it or you don't, right? But it's not always that black and white when we're talking about comprehension. So we are going to take something really basic that I'm imagining most of us are aware of. We remember learning about this in school, okay? And we like to call it the 6 different dimensions of comprehension, okay? Because again, it's not always going to be something that's automatic, especially when we're talking about something really complex or some dense material, okay? So with that, let's move on to our first dimension of comprehension, and that is being able to explain something. We also want to talk about the different perspectives on a subject. So what is the information proving this, and what is the information maybe going against this? Not everything will have a pro and a con or somebody going against this information, but if it does, it's helpful to think about why certain people maybe oppose, right? It can help you better understand what you think you already know. Then we move on to self-knowledge. So what are some reasons why we have to study this? What does this have to do with you, right? A lot of times we'll just learn something, and if we're not necessarily enjoying it, our energy feels like it's drained. It feels like it's taking forever. It feels like this is pointless, right? But we kind of have to tap into a little bit more as to why this is so important for us. Even if it's one of those classes where you sometimes feel like, I have no idea why I have to take this. I just want to get right into the meat of what I am trying to learn. So we'll talk about that self-knowledge as well. Can you empathize? Okay, when we're learning something, can we tap into this emotion? What made whoever wrote whatever you're reading, what made them want to write this, right? What experiences did they have in their life push them to maybe research this topic, to become, an expert in the field? What was the motivating force for them? And can you empathize again with them? Moving on to how can this be applied practically? So again, when we're learning something, maybe sometimes we don't think about practical application when we're talking about, there's a bunch of different subjects, right? And sometimes if we don't try to apply it to our own lives, so again, thinking about it, we find it pointless. And if we're finding it pointless, then our interest level is gonna, drop. So we wanna think about this as well. And our final point that we'll discuss is, how has this been interpreted by others? All right, it can be different professionals in the field. It can be an artistic rendition on the subject, right? It could be a lot of different things. So hopefully now we've kind of piqued your interest when it comes to comprehension. There are so many things that influence us being able to understand something correctly. It's not always going to be something that's fast. So let's move on to the first point. And we really want to make sure that as we're reading, we're getting it, right? Again, this is the point of this is comprehension. For example, we might be familiar with like the standardized reading tests that we would take in school, right? Some of us would run out of time. For example, if you would have answered 19 out of the 38 questions, and even if you had answered them correctly, you still would have only gotten a 50%. Right? And that's kind of how the standardized reading tests are done here in the United States, and I'm imagining all over the world. But obviously, if we answer 19 out of the 20, we would have answered more. But what if we hadn't answered them correctly, right? So comprehension, these exams, they're kind of all over the place. But again, we want to make sure as we're reading, we are obviously automatically understanding as well. Now, we're going to try something out really quickly. We're going to just do a little reading exercise to see how your comprehension is on something pretty basic. Okay, so go ahead and check out our irisreading.com/comp, all right, that link that we shared in the beginning. And you're going to look for the document called focusrituals.pdf. Okay, so we're going to read. You'll notice it's on my screen right now. We're going to read this for about 2 minutes, okay? And then feel free to share what was your overall comprehension on this article. All right, so we want to just start with something basic. Do you understand what you're reading? All right, we'll see. You'll notice the timer going off in the middle of the screen right here. So it's a 2-minute timer, and I will disable my webcam while we do this. All right, so it's just a 2-minute timer. Again, we're going to read and we're going to see if we understand. Just going to assess your comprehension, okay? We're going to do the best we can to do this. I know reading for 2 minutes is kind of weird. Who does that, right? But we just want to get like a general understanding of how your comprehension is on something pretty basic like this. And again, the article is called Focus Rituals. All right, so at the end of the 2 minutes, I will hop back on. Here we go, everyone. Start reading. Alrighty, so that was us again, just reading. Now we can see what was our comprehension there. If you had to give yourself a percentage, so we had to grade ourselves based on what we just read, what would you give yourself? Would you give yourself a 60, a 70, an 80%, right? And again, this is really without talking about all those things we've mentioned in the beginning. Okay, we want to see again the before and the after. Okay, so if you want to share what your comprehension was for today's or for this article that we read, again, focus rituals, feel free to drop that in the chat. Now, let's take something, as we mentioned in the beginning, very basic that we probably know from a long time ago, and let's dissect it using these 6 different dimensions of comprehension. Okay, so those 6 steps that we shared in the beginning. Let's take something as simple, well, not simple, but let's take something as widely known as gravity. Okay, now we are all pretty familiar with gravity, right? We are aware of what goes up goes down or falls down, right? We know that. Or do we know that? Something to keep in mind, okay? Because again, what's the difference between just kind of saying, I know it, versus I understand that, or I comprehend that. That makes sense to me. I can explain this, all right? Now, we all know, for example, we need to pay our taxes, right? We know we need to throw the garbage out every day, right? But again, as we said, it's just knowing, simply knowing enough. All right, so we want to, again, we're going to take the subject of gravity, we're going to break it down. We're going to say how much of gravity you actually know, because again, we might be saying, oh, I know that already. All right, so you know gravity, you know what goes up comes down, right? Can you explain, for example, we're going to start off with something a little tougher here, gravity in relation to the theory of relativity. Can you tie that in? Can you explain it? Okay, some of you might be like, oh, that's where I drop off, right? Or how quantum physics ties into gravity. That's another question, right? Or in relation to distance, how does distance tie into gravity? What is the formula? How does all of this work together? Now we might be thinking, well, I might have known it, but I don't know that, right? So again, those are the types of questions we want to ask whenever we're learning something. And bringing back home that point is simply knowing it enough. Just a basic knowing, is that enough? Especially for our students in the audience, is that enough? Right? We don't know what questions are going to be on the exam always. So is it just enough to kind of simply know something superficially, right? So let's get into that first step. Again, we talked about those 6 dimensions, explaining something. Now, as we learn something, we want to be able to explain this, right? You might be familiar with like Feynman's method of taking notes, right? One of the steps is explaining something in simple terms, but also in technical terms. Unfortunately, however, this is the step most people kind of stop. They can explain it. They can explain it to the wind, for example, and then they don't try to deepen their comprehension on the subject, which is not a good thing. Okay, so the purpose of us wanting to explain it again is because our audience, who hopefully is an audience that is unaware of the subject, maybe never heard of it, they can start poking holes in what you think you know. So if you have a little brother, little sister, can you try to simplify it, explain it to them in a simple term? And then you might be thinking, well, what kinds of questions are they going to ask? They're not going to ask anything philosophical. They might ask something as simple as why? Why is this the way you say it is, right? And again, those are the types of questions we want to obviously be able to answer as we're learning something. Can you explain it to your professor? Can your professor maybe poke holes in what you think you know? Or does it sound like you're just regurgitating the definition of something you read earlier in the day? Do you really get it? Okay, if you speak another language, for example, that takes another portion of your brain, right? It activates it. So can you explain it in that language, right? There's also, it reminds me of this subreddit. It's like explain like I'm 5. I'm not sure if you've heard of that before. You want to be able to explain it to a 5-year-old, right? The point is we want to explain. Okay, we want to explain it to someone, mom and dad, classmate, colleague, brother, sister, whoever. The point is, explain it to someone so that, again, you can test your own knowledge on the subject. You might start feeling like, oh dear, I'm sweating. I don't know if I'm going to be able to explain this right. And maybe we're not ready to explain, which maybe means that we don't really understand something. Okay, so keep that in mind. Again, simple questions. Why, who, when, what, right? All of that. What does it have to do with anything? Again, we can't explain it. We don't really get it. All right, so obviously we know the ball will roll down the hill, down the driveway, down the mountain. But why? Can you explain why? What are the physics behind that? How does gravity tie in to this? Now notice we're not going to answer any of these questions today. We do have the answers in case you're looking for them, but we won't answer them. And the reason, again, is because these types of questions help us deepen our comprehension. They pique our interest, right? And that's really important when we're learning. So we should be asking those questions so that, again, we get a better understanding of what we're trying to learn. All right, so ask all the questions and make sure you can answer them as well. So, checked off the first box, explaining something. We can explain it, that's great. But as we said, most people, they kind of fall off after that. They don't try to deepen comprehension anymore. Let's get into the second dimension of comprehension, and that is of the different perspectives on a subject. Now, you might be thinking, well, wait a minute, lady. What are the different perspectives on gravity? Did you know there are people who don't believe in gravity? This might be funny, right, to you. You might be thinking this is some kind of joke. This is a real website, by the way, and it's called the Anti-Gravity Alliance. And they have a list of supporting websites, right? Again, on their website. They also have an email you can reach out to if you'd like more information on the subject. The point is thinking about other people's perspectives or the opposing perspective on what you are learning can help you defend what you know or what you believe in, right, as you're learning. If you can defend their argument pro or against whatever you're learning, then you've got good bearing on what you're trying to learn. You've got people, what is this, the National Center for Science Education. They're calling gravity a theory. Okay. We've got people that are writing dissertation for their PhD saying gravity is a myth. All right. This was written fairly recently, 2018. We've got astrophysicists who say gravity is not real. Okay. Dr. Brian Keating. So now we'll take something we thought we knew, we thought was fact, we thought was legit, and we've got all this proof going against what we thought we knew, right? So that might start to get your wheels turning, right? You might have just a curiosity or say, I'm not going to jump on the Anti-Gravity Alliance's fan page, you might be thinking, but I at least want to know why they think that, right? It's interesting to at least see why, but again, that, as we said, not only is piquing our interest, but we can also help defend what we're learning, right? Can we explain it correctly? So, again, you might be thinking, I never thought about this before, right? Which is good. We want you to think that as you're learning something. Because again, comprehension isn't something that's automatic. It's not something that's just going to happen overnight, just by automatically reading something. It's not all going to just, right, be clear in your head. We've got to ask these types of questions. But the problem is that most of us don't even know we can ask these questions, right? It's almost like we're learning to learn again. Okay, so we've talked about the different perspectives, something to keep in mind as you're learning, right? Whatever it is that you're learning. Now let's get into your self-knowledge. And guess what? It actually is all about you. Right? You might have had someone say, gosh, Cynthia, it's not all about you. Well, actually it is when you're learning, right? That's exactly what it's about, all you. So as we're learning something, we want to make sure we are giving it function and purpose. Okay, so how does that apply to you? We're all different, right? We talk in our other workshops about how we all think differently, we reason differently, right? And if that's the case, then that has to mean that there is a special way for you to take your notes and for you to try to memorize information. Again, I won't share too much, but I invite you to check out those workshops. Again, they'll be offered next week on Eventbrite. But again, the point is, how can we apply that to ourselves, right? How can we find some practical function and purpose? If you've ever used, again, in harmony with our theme, which is gravity, if you've ever used eye drops, for example, we don't have to worry about the drops floating up towards the sky, right? Because we know gravity will help us, right? It's just a matter of figuring out how to get that drop right. Sometimes it falls out. But the point is, we know, right? We know what's going to happen. So we can apply it again to certain scenarios throughout the day. Think about how you can use this on a day-to-day basis. All right, because again, we don't always do this when we're learning. We don't try to tie it back into us and how we think and how we learn and what we've lived through and what we've seen or what we're looking at right now. We don't always think about that as we're learning, because we think, well, what does that have to do with what I'm learning? Everything. It has everything to do with it. All right. And again, if you're maybe thinking, I'm just not interested, you know, the subject is boring, I can't stand it, I hate it, right? Again, going back to your self-knowledge and how can this be applied to you, okay? So that is our big number 3 when we're trying to understand something. Now let's do kind of like a halfway check. We've got 1, 2, 3 more to go, right? Now we've probably got we're just thinking a little bit more about gravity, right? It's like we're looking at gravity from the front, from the sides, right? We're getting a better understanding of it. We're appreciating it maybe a little bit more. And that is why we're moving into step 4, which is empathy. As you're learning something, can you empathize with whoever wrote whatever it is that you're reading? And you empathize with the subject, okay? Again, we're tapping into our emotions here. And we're really thinking about what drove this person to become an expert in the field, right? Whoever the author is of whatever you've written. Why is this subject so important? Let's think about, again, gravity. Have you ever thought about maybe empathizing with an astronaut? And you might be thinking, well, why would I? What do they need empathy for? Well, I can think of a lot of things actually, being up in space a long time without family, right? Maybe we take some of the comforts that we have here on Earth for granted sometimes, okay? And again, remember, we're thinking about gravity. So what do you think would happen if an astronaut, have you ever even thought about this, for example? If an astronaut has to go to the bathroom, now, again, thinking about gravity, we know here on Earth, when you sit on what we call the porcelain throne, it's not going to go anywhere, right? Just down, hopefully, unless your plumbing isn't that great, but it's going to go down, right? But what happens when you're in space? Everything floats up, right? And this isn't a joke. It's pretty disastrous, right? So interestingly enough, we had to do another Google search. How do astronauts go to the bathroom in space? Okay. And this was written in 2013, a look at the space shuttle toilet and the deepest, darkest secret about the space flight. Again, we've probably never thought about this, right? We're talking here, if you want the article, I can send it over to you. But this research and this creation of the toilet for a spaceship or, you know, for the astronauts when they're up in space, a lot of money, a lot of research, and a lot of prototypes that were very interesting to read about. I read something earlier that said that they used to have like straps and like footrests and all these fancy things, right? when going to the bathroom in space. All right. And they have extensive training on how to use these fancy new toilets on these spaceships as well. So now, can you empathize with astronauts now? Can you imagine yourself maybe trying to use the bathroom up in space, not knowing how these toilets work, or maybe not even thinking about the fact that everything is floating up when it should be going down, but again, you're in space, right? That might be a pretty horrific surprise, right? If we've never actually, I've never been in space, but I can only imagine that I would definitely radio in and say, you know what, I need to go back down to Earth. This is not going to work for me, right? So think about that. Empathize again with the subject you are trying to learn. Okay, look for these different odd scenarios, the weirdest thing you can think of, right? Who would have thought of an astronaut? And we're just saying, like, right, sitting on the toilet, right? But what are some other things that maybe float up as they're in space? And we usually count on it floating down, but it goes the other way. So again, just again, piquing our interest, right? We're probably thinking, I would have never asked that, but now I'm curious. All right, which is the point. That's exactly what we want for today's workshop. All right, so we've empathized, we've talked about our self-knowledge, we've talked about these different perspectives. Who would have thunk that there are such an organization as the Anti-Gravity Alliance, right? Now let's move into some practical application. Okay, some practical application to gravity. This one is pretty simple because we all know, right? If we have a cup, you never put it too close to the edge of a table or a desk, especially if it had liquid, because it will fall. We never have to wonder, right? If we're throwing a ball up in the air, if it's ever going to come down, unless it gets stuck in a tree, right? But again, some questions we can ask when it comes to application. How is this applied to the larger world? Okay. We just want to think about that. Obviously, we know this ball is going to go up, 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 and then it's going to come crashing down. All right. So again, thinking about the larger world, whatever subject you're learning, how is this applied maybe on a global scale? All right. Now, these questions may not always be easy to answer, but that's the point, right? That's how we deepen our understanding on a specific subject. Okay, so again, think about this application, real world application, right? On your day-to-day, right, basis, what you do on a daily basis, okay? What are some things that you intentionally do or not do because we know how gravity works, right? On a day-to-day basis, you pour your coffee, you put it on the table, you sit on the sofa, right? And how does gravity tie into all of that every day? Okay. So our final point for today, how has this been interpreted by others? And you might be thinking, well, how the heck is gravity interpreted any other way? All right. But we did say in the beginning, a version of this could be artistic renditions. Okay. So let's think about maybe some artists, some sculptors, some people that have maybe been inspired by gravity. Okay. We have certain sculptures that we found, again, that are gravity-defying sculptures. Okay, so this is called The Force of Nature by Lorenzo Quinn. Again, you might be thinking, well, you know, it looks like it's defying gravity. Well, just something to keep in mind, right? We've got this beauty, the Fontainebleau Castle. All right, this is actually in Paris, France, and it's a real elephant, right? Balancing himself by his tusk or by his nose. What is the right word for that, right? But he's, again, it looks like we're defying gravity here because I don't think that doesn't look right, right? But this is a real thing. You can actually visit this. Right, we've got the floating rocks in Cairo. I would love to see these. Again, weird. How is this staying upright? Even an excessive amount of glue or cement or concrete, I don't know if, even that would be enough to hold up 2 boulders. Right? So we may be thinking, well, how is that doing that? Okay, again, piquing our interest, which is really important. We've got these book sculptures that can be found around Madrid, and it is a dream to see these in real life. Obviously, we're Irish reading. We love books, right? I would love to be in a room with a book vortex. That's amazing. How did this artist get this to look like this, right? And again, no amount of glue, I think, is enough for that. So there's got to be something else sprinkled in there, right? The point is that we are, again, intrigued by all of this here. So think about that as we're learning, okay? Think about the different interpretations on the subject, artistic renditions, right? I don't have a picture of this, but there was also a composer named Gustav Holst, who's also coming to Chicago and going to, he's him now, but they will play, what is it, the symphony, Chicago Symphony Orchestra will be playing one of their pieces, Gustav Holst's pieces called The Planets. All right, and of course this is after each of the planets, but it's just interesting, right? Gravity, the planets, the Earth, they all work together. So again, a different maybe take on the subject. All right, so again, just think about the artistic renditions on a subject. Think about maybe finding some paintings on whatever it is you're learning, right? Maybe a poem. I know this one maybe feels a little odd, like how can you find artistic renditions on, maybe if you're a med student, chromosomal abnormalities? You'd be surprised what you can find, all right? Really, there are artistic renditions on many different things. So when maybe reading about it, you feel like banging your head across the wall, maybe we should switch our approach to understanding something. All right. And again, we did say most of us try to read and we try to comprehend immediately. And that's not always the case. Sometimes we need the help of these types of questions, okay? So let's do a quick recap of the different dimensions, as we said, of comprehension. Step 1, and these don't have to be done in this order. This is just kind of how we wrote out the presentation. But step 1, you want to be able to explain something, okay? Explain it to people who don't understand it. And even better, explain it to people who do. All right? Explain it to people who do so that they can maybe fact check you. They're like, you didn't say that right, right? Why is this word better than that word when explaining something? Whatever it is that we're trying to explain. Okay, explain it to children so that they can ask us why, right? And if we can't answer why, then we don't know why, okay? So that was step 1, explain. Step 2 are the different perspectives, and we talked about the Anti-Gravity Alliance as well as other individuals who have written dissertation, right? People who call obviously gravity a theory, right? Why is it, that's another question, why is it a theory and not a fact? Again, just a question. I'm not going to answer them, but we have all these like maybe little questions now on something we thought we knew, but looks like we don't. All right. Next thing, your self-knowledge, applying it to yourself day-to-day basis. All right. It is all about you. It absolutely is, especially when you're learning. All right. So I don't want to say be selfish, but when we're talking about learning, absolutely. Okay. Empathy, we talked about our poor astronauts that have to, sometimes maybe have some oopsies up in space. But the fancy schmancy toilets that they have now, and read a little bit more about that. It's really interesting, okay? Because again, we've probably never thought about that. But another fun fact, well, another fun question, and we posted about this a couple of weeks ago. Can astronauts burp in space? Okay, and how gravity kind of ties into that. So if you want to Google it, I definitely recommend it, or you can send us a message on Instagram and we can give you that answer as well. But I will say that the word chunky bubbles is in the explanation. So think about that, because again, we can burp down here on Earth, no problem. But what happens when you're up there. Okay, so empathy and how important that is when we're learning something. How can this be applied practically? Okay, again, try to find some practical application in whatever it is that you are learning. Again, we might just start learning something and just be like, I just have to memorize this. I don't care how this can be applied. So that's really not the best attitude to have when learning, okay? Because we want to have the deepest level of comprehension on whatever subject we are learning, again. And our final point that we discussed was interpretation on this subject. So how has this been interpreted by others? And we saw all of those defying gravity sculptures that we shared, right? Maybe we're thinking, well, how the heck is that standing up like that? Again, thinking about gravity or defying gravity and what that means. All right, so let's keep that in mind. We also want to tie something in really important when we are reading. All right, so we've talked about how to deepen our comprehension, but we're also, as we mentioned, very, very, very passionate about obviously understanding as we're reading as much as we can before we start to read. Okay, we are in the business here at Iris Reading of working smarter and not harder, which means that our goal for our students and our participants is to really get as much of an understanding as possible before you actually start to read something. Okay, a little bit about me. Again, I grew up in Puerto Rico, spent my summers and most of the year there as well. And it's obviously very hot. If you are from Puerto Rico, you've ever been, it's like a jungle hot. All right, it's like a sauna with 100 degrees humidity. So just imagine that. And as children, we had little rivers around where we lived. But there's also a lot of wildlife in Puerto Rico as well, right? There's a lot of things that can electrocute you that are probably in the water before you even think about jumping in. Things that can zap you or bite you or worse. So we would accustomed to inspecting whatever it is we wanted to jump into before we did it, right? We didn't want any surprises. Same thing when reading. We don't want you to just nosedive into the book, right? Without making sure you have a good idea or a good layout of the land, like understand it. Okay, so these are a few things you want to look for when you are inspecting, right? Obviously the intro, our headings and subheadings, words in bold, titles of charts, tables, and diagrams, the conclusion, as well as any questions that may have been published in that piece. All right, so we want to inspect all of this. Again, it's almost like an appetizer before the entree, right? We can get a nice sampling of what to expect, and this is also helping us with our comprehension as well. Now, no rule, hopefully for the rest of your life you live by, is to inspect anything you need to read before you read it. Okay, hopefully you're doing that, whether it's a chapter out of a textbook, a report, a journal article, a 35-page contract, right? A loan agreement, anything like that. We want to inspect it. Now, automatically for most of us, and I'll include myself, if you see you have to read something that's like 50 pages, you automatically are just like, I want to do that later or never, right? But inspecting can help us get through the content, okay? Now let's assess let's see how this works with comprehension when inspecting. Okay, so again, back to that Dropbox link, irisreading.com/comp, C-O-M-P, and this time you're going to look for flow.pdf. Okay, so we'll pop it open and it looks like this, and let's just inspect it together quickly right now. Okay, so the title is Going with the Flow. And the intro is, life is a series of natural and spontaneous changes. Don't resist them. That only creates sorrow. Let reality be reality. Let things flow naturally forward in whatever way they like, by Lao Tzu. Okay. Also mentioning that I'm just kind of reading what we would inspect through. So that introductory quote, we would read through that. Now let's read through all of the headings. Okay. So number one, realize that you can't control everything. Number two, become aware. Number 3, breathe. Whew, I'm out of breath right now. Number 4, get perspective. 5, practice. 6, laugh. And 7, realize that you can't control others. Wow. So maybe just reading the title, we might have been like, I don't know, what, like, why do we have to read this? But now we have a better understanding of what this article is going to discuss. Maybe now you're interested a little bit more, right? I think I am. I have to read this one a little later. Okay, so now that we have inspected, let us finish reading this article and let's see what our comprehension is after we finish. Okay, so again, I will disable my webcam. You'll see the timer going off in the middle of the screen there. Finish reading. I'll give you 2 minutes, okay? And then we will see your overall comprehension. So again, you can grade yourself. All right, here we go. 2-minute timer is starting now. Okie dokie. So that was us. We inspected. We got a nice appetizer before we read this, right? Now we read it. Now let's assess your comprehension here. Would you say that now, after talking about everything that ties into very good comprehension, perfect comprehension, if you will, your comprehension was just a little higher the second time versus the first time? And if it was, you get the success, baby. And even if you didn't, that's okay. This might be the first time you're ever hearing about these types of questions, that we can ask these questions, right? Sometimes it feels like we don't even know what to ask. So I hope that after breaking down comprehension and its different dimensions, you have a better understanding of how to approach your material. Okay, and all of these questions are transferable, which means that you can apply them to really any subject, some a little more than others, but the point is that, again, we're starting to deepen our understanding, or we will deepen our understanding with whatever it is we are trying to learn. So really quickly, in summary, when it comes to inspecting, we want you to get the gist of what's going on first, okay? As we said, the appetizer, like the calamari before you order your actual meal. Now, our iris method, all right, we'll share that to finish up today's presentation. The I, we talked about inspecting, all right? We want to inspect anything we need to inspect before we actually read it, followed by, obviously, read. This is discussed in our speed reading workshop, so I hope that if you are maybe looking to be a little bit more of a productive reader, you check out our speed reading classes, right? We do have them on our website at irisreading.com. We are not sure how long we'll be offering the free speed reading workshop workshops on Eventbrite, so definitely take advantage of that if you are interested. We also have an advanced version with our founder and CEO, Paul Novak. So if you may be taking the basic version and you'd like to take the advanced one, definitely check that out. We talk about inquire in another workshop, and that is of asking questions. So this is in our note-taking workshop, and we want to make sure we are asking all the questions, right? We saw today how important questions are when we are learning, but the same can be said when taking notes. Okay, so again, if you're looking to maybe take a note-taking workshop, be a little bit more of a productive note taker. And as we said earlier, work smarter, not harder. Definitely check that out as well. And we also said if you're not understanding something, you should not move to the final step, which is storing. Okay, don't try to memorize anything you don't actually get. All right, we didn't really talk about storing today, but again, if you're maybe looking to find a better way to memorize information, then our memory workshop is very, very popular. It's also my favorite one to teach. So check us out again, irisreading.com, for all of those workshops. And we're very excited. This is the third time we have given this comprehension workshop. So definitely let us know in the comments down below what your thoughts were on this workshop. Really quickly, if you liked some of the articles that we brought out in today's class, they're all from a book by Leo Babauta, and he's given us permission to actually forward the book to anyone interested. So if you'd like a copy of the book, send me an email at cynthia@irisreading.com, and we can get that to you. That is all for me. Thank you all so much for coming. If you have questions, comments, please leave them below. You can also reach out to us via social media, okay? Here are all of our handles. Very easy to get a hold of us on there, as well as it is connected to all of our cell phones, so we can see it immediately. With that, we hope to see you in a future workshop here at Iris Reading. Thanks for stopping by, and I hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.